run into a situation. I've run into a situation where I want to sort cars and have some of the cars that have not been used so much go out first. And I use Operations Pro, and I know that they often go by move count. And there are also some other ways you can set it up as a first in, first out, or FIFO, or last in, first out, or LIFO from a particular position. However, the situation that I have, I want actually the cars with the most move counts to move out first rather than those with the least move counts. Otherwise, the cars with the most move counts will just sit on the track and stagnate until the others catch up. So I'm looking for a way to kind of reverse that. I think what I'm going to have to do is go in and manually edit the move counts on the cars on that track so that they're all similar, and then let them fight it out. But any suggestions on how to make that work, I would appreciate.
So you said you want the ones with the most move counts, the ones that have been used most often, to be moved first. Did I hear you right?
Yeah, you heard me right, and that's kind of not exactly the way I want it to go. But if I just let it go by move count, these cars that have been in there will stay there for a long period of time, and I don't want them to stagnate there. And the difference in move counts, the average is about 7 or so, and some of these cars are showing 15 move counts. So you can see the number of times you hit that particular track. You'd hit it 8 times maybe before you catch up with these cars that have the high move counts. And also at the same time, you're adding more cars into this track as you're taking some out. And if they have the average count of 6, 7, or 8, the 15 count, 14 count move cars will never get out of there, probably in my lifetime.
Okay, well, any Operations Pro experts on? I just need the little cricket sound effect. It sounds like you might have a solution there by editing the move count to like fix the outliers. So it'll be a little bit more seemingly random. But like I said, I don't know that.
Yeah, I don't know that either. And as far as I can tell, there is no automated way in Operations Pro to modify move counts. Like I said, I can go in and do it manually, and that's my current plan. But it would be nice if I could set the move counts somehow, and then I could use either FIFO or LIFO to empty that track.
Right. I'm gonna drop a link in the chat. I don't know if you're a member of this group or not. If you look at the chat window, groups.io has a group called JMRI users.
I'm a member of that.
Okay. That's probably, again, unless somebody who's checked in the last few minutes has any information, that's probably going to be your best bet to see how you, because I believe Operations Pro is considered part of JMRI, so you should be able to ask that without getting yelled at.
Yeah, I'm sure I can. I don't think there's a real solution, but I just thought I would ask. Dan Boudreau, who is the major author of Operations Pro, may add a function into it if I ask him. However, I tend to lag back with a version of the software that works for me, rather than trying to stay up with the most current one and all of the current issues with the current one. I have something that works right now and I'm sticking with it.
Got it.
I have a related comment on move count. If well, first of all, I agree. Unless you're talking about lots and lots of cars, I think just going in and editing the move count probably will work just fine. But I had a related misconception about the first in, first out, or last in, first out. I had thought I could deliver a half a dozen cars to one track whose ultimate destination was one car at a time in another spur. And I thought it would move those cars one car at a time in the order that they were on the track, but that was a misconception. The first in, first out, and the last in, first out only applies to cars that were delivered at different times. Operations Pro doesn't know anything about standing order of cars or anything like that. So I asked that question, and that was the same answer. Dan Boudreau said, well, once the half a dozen cars are delivered to the initial track, just go in and edit the move count in incremental order and the way you want them delivered, and that works fine. So I don't know how many cars you're talking about, but if it's only a few cars, it doesn't take much to go in and edit those move counts.
Okay, thanks, George. Appreciate that. And that's kind of what I intend to do. I also noticed that when a train drops off 4, 5, or 6 cars, they all get the same time into the siding. It would be nice if they were separated by, say, 1 second or something, but their last move date doesn't go to that level of resolution.
Yeah,
So,
they're all the same. You're right. Yeah.
And greetings to Papillion. I spent a lot of time in the underground at SAC headquarters.
Oh, that's been remodeled a lot lately.
I think it got filled with water. Thanks, Eric. That's all I had.
Okay, well, sorry, we can't give you a definitive answer, but it sounds like you're already halfway there, so. Let's see, Dale's got a question. Any Digitrax experts here? I'm having an issue with the duplex radio system on the layout. The system will freeze at random times. This is with 2 different UR92s, and multiple throttles. UT4D, UT6D are used on the layout. Hey Dale, when you say it's freezing, what's it doing?
I'll lose all control of the locomotives. It'll run fine for a while, then all of a sudden it'll just, like I've lost the radio system. I have no control, can't get the, blow the horn, ring the bell, no throttle control at all till I actually shut the whole system down and reboot it. Then it'll come back up, and then another random time it'll start doing it again. We had a op session 2 weeks ago that just was almost totally ruined with the system. So
was it just one engine? I've had cases where like the throttle times out, and then you have
yeah, it's almost like the whole system times out, but everything just freezes up, and I can't get anything to come back by trying to reacquire or anything like that. It's just like the whole system, like when your computer hangs.
So like all of the engines
punch all kinds of buttons and nothing happens.
Okay, so like all of the throttles stop working simultaneously?
Yeah, all the throttles quit working. I've got, we've got a small layout, Eric. You've seen the stuff on it. I mean, I'm running basically usually 2 locomotives at a time, when they're switching and during an op session. we've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, about 7 locomotives on the way out when we're operating. And they may be running, they may not, just depends on what the guys are doing when they're
Sure.
operating. And we did get struck by lightning in June. And I noticed that my loco buffer USB wasn't working anymore, but the system seemed to be running fine. We actually had a July session, no issues there. Then we were right in the middle of working on the house in August, so we didn't have one then. September session, really didn't see any issues with that one. But
Yeah.
boy, this October session, it was to the point where I was just gonna, shut the session down, send guys home.
But that's strange.
Yeah,
Um,
tell me about it.
I would say talk to Digitrax, but good luck with that.
Well, yeah, I called them and I'm running a DCS 100, which is an old one.
Yep.
And they no
What I
longer
started with.
support that.
Okay.
And so, I'm working with, I know probably some of you guys know Steve Davis. We actually tried putting firmware back on my UR92. It seems to come up and work, but again, we have that issue. So now I'm starting to look at, well, okay, maybe I need to replace it with a 93 and then look at a new command station. So
Okay.
I didn't know if anybody had seen anything like this or not.
Dale,
Sorry,
Dave-
Fred's asking are the wired throttles still working when this happens?
Yeah, I can plug in my UT6D and it works just fine. It won't do anything. So it's got to be in the radio system somewhere.
There's a few comments in the chat here about, I've got duplex downstairs. I haven't had any problem with it, but I haven't really stressed it. And I also have a newer command state. I've got a DCS 200. So let's see. I've gone Wi-Fi with LNWIs. No issues with TCS.
Eric,
Well,
I've got a
go ahead.
comment. Yeah, Dave Cochran here. I used to be a dealer for Digitrax and for NCE and a number of others as a side job while I was an engineer at Lockheed Martin. I also used Digitrax and had tremendous problems with duplex when I moved to a new location about 7 years ago. I could not find a clear channel anywhere. And my question, I guess, to Dale is, have you tried scanning the spectrum and looking for a clear channel? It's possible that somebody with a strong signal came up on the channel that you're currently using and causing some RFI or radio frequency interference with your channel. You might try changing to a different channel. Also make sure that everybody, I've forgotten the term anymore, I'm getting kind of old. Make sure that all of your things are set to the same, it's like a band name or something, or like a uniform name. To be totally honest, I solved my issue after I had retired from both Lockheed and the company where I was a Digitrax dealer. I solved my issues by going to NCE, and I haven't had any issues since then. And I'm not trying to badmouth Digitrax because I used Digitrax from the 1990s up until the late 2010s, like 2016, 2017, when I just couldn't make it work again. I'm not familiar with the UR93 because that came out after I got out of Digitrax. So that's an option you may try. Some people are having good luck with it. I had 14 DC, I forget what they were called, DC something 400D throttles. I also was running a DC 100 command station like you are, Dale.
Yeah.
Everything was working fine. The good news for me, at least, when I went to NCE, I found I could make a simple interface between the NCE command station and Loconet so that I could keep all of my Digitrax boosters along with the NCE command station. So
Okay,
just something to think about.
okay, all right. David, thank you very much. I mean, I'm to the point now where I'm looking at a DRS 5000 system because it will interface with what I do have in Digitrax. I hate to lose the throttles and that kind of stuff that I've already spent the money on. So
That Digikais, the Dutch name?
yeah, that's
Okay.
the Digikai.
Digikai, okay.
Yeah. My technical advisor uses it on his layout, and he's very happy with it, the system. It's a KCS third sub in Tulsa. So I've got some strong people I can rely on down here. But
Yeah.
I thought maybe somebody here had seen something similar to this. So
All right. Let's see. There's a question about whoever Joe is. Somebody new to the operations and the design phase of layout. Any recommendations for programs to use for car inventory and forwarding? JMRI Operations Pro is one of the, certainly these days, probably the most popular and most supported, simply because it's open source. I know there's a lot of homegrown systems out there, you know, the car order system, just traditional car cards, waybills. But software wise, some of the vendors who have been out there are no longer out there. You know, Shenware was one that comes up, but they've basically gone, I think he's essentially retired. We've had this discussion on the group before about, you know, how to get that. And I know we've been able to get like one update for somebody, but for the most part, it's shut down. He lost his domain name and really hasn't wanted to deal with it. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what are the other software package. Ship It still out there? Anybody heard of that one?
Ship It's still out there. I personally don't recommend it, but
Okay.
I think Operations Pro is just top notch.
So there used to be one called ProRail, but they've since shut down. That was
It's
one
out there as open source.
Do it.
It's out there.
Did he
Jim
open source
War
it?
passed away, and the program is not being updated or anything like that. It's compiled so nobody can get into it, but the family has allowed people to download the program. It's just, it will never be updated.
Okay, yeah, so I would not, for somebody new, I certainly wouldn't pick that. Just,
No.
I mean, there's no reason to pick something that's already retired. Yeah, JMRI Operations Pro is certainly one of the more common ones. And like I said, some of the other ones have been used. You'll see them out there, but there's not a lot of active support going on. Any other suggestions from the group for Joe?
I usually, anytime I see somebody put out one of those operating computer systems, if it's a shareware or freeware or something, I will try it. And while I do not use JMRI, I was able to actually, with just what I consider a small amount of work, actually get it up and running for my layout and do probably 75% of everything I wanted just from reading the manual. So it's not that hard to get started.
Yeah, and it helps if you're around, you know, a place where other people are doing operations. I mean, it's the same as like DCC. Well, which one do I choose, NC or Digit? Find people around you, use what they're using. You know, I know it turns almost near religious debate of Digitrax versus NCE these days, and now, you know, the Dutch one, you know, they're picking up some steam lately. But yeah, I would probably look at Operations Pro as a starting point. You can find lots of help. I mean, there's the link that I threw into the chat. They support Operations Pro as well. So
I just like to comment on Operations Pro and say
Sure.
that it has probably the best documentation of any car forwarding software that's available. It's fantastic documentation. And along with that, it has tremendous diagnostic capabilities built into the program as well.
Yep, and it's actively being maintained too. I mean, they put up regular updates to it. So, all right. Let's see. All right. Well, let me pull up this question from David, different David here. I don't think it's a David Walsh. All right, I'll just read the email and we'll see what questions we have. I'm an OPSIG member living in Melbourne. Unfortunately, okay. I'm modeling modern day intrastate and interstate railways in Australia. I model country and interstate passenger stations, as well as yards and industries around Melbourne, Victoria. Completed about 80% of track, hope to complete the balance by year's end, and have been planning my ops scheme. Freight trains are mostly unit trains with some mixed container freight. The query is about the paperwork side of my freight cars. As most are unit trains, there is not much switching, so my thought was not to have individual cars for the freight cars, but maybe have groups of freight cars represented by a card. So he's got about 5 more items. So I think I've seen this done a couple of ways where you have a block of cars that always stay together. There was what's his name? Jeff Otto's layout where he's got all the little ore cars. He has a car card for every 5 or every 7 cars. If you've got a string of 15 coal cars that never come apart, I've seen, the one car is fine, or the one card for that unit is fine. Any other experience with that?
Dave Cochran here again. I will say that Operations Pro has a thing called kernels, which will handle groups of cars, and they call it kernels.
Okay.
And I've had a little bit, not nearly as much as Dave Hussman, but I've had a little bit of prototype experience. And I often tell people I never hopped off the caboose with a deck of cards in my hand to switch cars. So I'm a switch list advocate, and Operations Pro fits me fine. And with kernels, it keeps track of a group of cars as if they are a unit, like a unit train.
Okay, I've seen the same thing. Yeah, and there's some comments in here. Car cards can do blocks of cars, first and last listed, for example. JMRI can do kernels and keep them together, which is what you just said.
If he's just doing solid unit or solid intermodal trains, then he could just have a train card, and the train says I need number 16 cars in it, and then you just fill out that many cars and be done with it.
Yep. I'll take up to 12 stack cars for this train, and I don't really care which ones they are. So.
Ironically, bringing up Jeff Otto, one of the iron ore range railroads did not actually track their cars by car number. Like, they didn't issue waybills and all that other stuff. They just they measured how much tonnage they put in the cut of cars and then sent that to the ore dock. So, it'd be almost the same thing.
Right. I mean, the cars never leave the railroad, and that's, they are like those ore cars, they just back and forth, back and forth. I mean, they never leave, they don't go into inner railroad exchange or anything like that. So yeah, I could see them not even, I think about the only reason you'd want to number them was to make sure you're doing maintenance on them. Like, wait a minute, didn't we just paint this one? Yeah, that's a good idea as well. Just have a train, essentially a train card or a train orders for the train. And I one time somebody was doing, they were actually numbering the individual containers on a car, and you had to find the right container to put into the stack car, or like the right trailer number. And I was like, yeah, no, that's too much for me. Okay, so the short answer, David, if you're listening, this is for David Walsh if I'm talking to him. It's perfectly fine to do a block of a car for every 4 cars. You could do a block for a string of like again, Australian cars are a little bit different, but I know they'd have stacked cars of some sort. Or if you don't really care and the cars always stay together, then just create instructions for the train and be done with it. Let's see, his next question. At the time, however, there will be some switching to set up the interstate mixed container freights, which will include some flat cars with containers, steel and cement. As part of the ops scheme, I intend to throw in the odd situation where a freight car has to be sidelined for repair. So the sideline for repair, one common thing to do is when the train goes by a particular spot on the railroad, you draw a card out of a bin. Most of them are something like, well, there's no problem, keep going. But occasionally there'll be, you've got a bad axle, drop the 5th car out of your string at the next siding or something to that effect. I'm sure people have got better examples of that than that one. The bad order, or like some of the electronic devices that are like the car detectors. Like the company that makes like the speedometer, I think they have one that will do like a bad order, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, Boulder Creek Electronics. Yep, put it in
Boulder
there.
Creek, that's who I was thinking of. And so the question here is, does the group have any car card suggestions I could use that would allow for the unit train scenario, as well as switching some cars out onto interstate trains? So I think we kind of hit that. For Mr. Walsh's benefit, you could certainly have a string of intermodals represented by a card or several cards, and then you could just have other cars too. There's no reason you can't mix the two. Also, with container traffic, how are the freight car flats and containers identified on car cards? So the freight car itself typically has a number on it, right? TTX 1, 2, 3, 4. But containers, I don't track the individual containers. Now you can get into places where you're swapping loads out. Like I could see this doing with containers too, where you essentially, when you pull into wherever the depot, you pull the containers out and then the train goes back empty. But seen that done with like ore cars, but containers, I don't know, for the people who live along the tracks, do you see a lot of empty stack cars going, or do they just swap out one container and put another one on? Seems
well, if you've got well, there's 2 different things. One, if it's a bad order car, if the car is bad enough to set out, then you set it out like right where it is.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a detector, 99% of the time, if an online detector detects a bad order car, you set it out ASAP. You don't take it to a yard.
So like the next siding you come to or something, you can.
Now, Yeah, if you're in a yard and you have a bad order car, then you can cut it out of the track and send it to the rip track or whatever. If it's a container, they just take it. First off, there wouldn't be anything that would detect a bad order container online.
Oh,
It would just go to the next ramp, be grounded, and that's where they'd figure out it was bad order.
no, sorry. He's talking, I switched the containers are not bad ordered. So the car can be bad ordered as you were saying. He was just asking, do you identify the containers on the car cards?
Oh,
And I was going to say, I have not seen a railroad where, well, most of them, you don't even touch the containers or the trailers. You just leave them alone. And they're not like coal loads that you might pull out and run the train back empty, but I don't know what everybody else's
Yeah,
experience.
this is Burr Stewart, and I do a lot of rail fanning on the BNSF main line, and I almost never see an empty well car or anything else. I mean, once in a while I will.
Yeah.
But it's very unusual because they would just leave that and they wouldn't send an empty without putting something on it.
Right, because the containers are going to come this way from
Right.
there. And they're going to put something on going back, whether it's an empty container or something, but it seems to be rare.
I brought this up recently in a chat, but I was just going to say, I'm using car cards and waybills and thinking about just putting an insert for the containers or the trailers in the car card and just having a little fun with, okay, you know, where are these trailers going? What type of, what type of shipment are we doing with this particular Topsy flat car? But that's another one of these things, just mainly for the entertainment of the layout owner, because like you were saying, anybody who's operating that train is not going to care about the individual trailers. They just need to know where that flat car needs to be spotted, if they're even spotted, because a lot of the container traffic is unit trains anyway.
Yeah. Staging.
Eric, they do send back empty flat cars. On the BN, they call them bear tables.
Okay.
And about maybe 1/3 of all the platforms come back empty. They go loaded. There's actually probably a lot more lately. It seems like there's a lot more empty bear tables coming back east than there is going west, from what I've seen.
Yeah, Dave, you're right. You're right about that. Because they don't necessarily route them on the same route either.
No.
And so the line I'm looking at is the one they would use for high priority westbound loads. But I have seen information, especially when we had this crisis the last couple of years. There were a lot of bear tables being repositioned because they were just in such a world of hurt getting all that stuff out of Los Angeles.
Like moving them out because they started moving a lot of the container ships to East Coast ports.
Right.
They just moving the cars to support. Was that what was going on?
Plus, you also have a difference thing is that not all container cars are created equal. There are some that can only handle 40-foot containers, some that handle the 50. The domestic ones, some can handle TOFC and that. And so a lot of times, if you get out of balance on the type of container, you may have to excess out the containers, switch out the containers, and at a port, something going to one of the West Coast export ports, you're going to want containers that can handle a 40-foot well. But if you're going to a domestic location, you're going to want the ones that can handle 53s.
Right.
Or
so like all the Schneider or the JB Hunt containers, those are all threes that are just moving across the country. But yeah, I think standard international is 40-foot, isn't that?
20 and 40. So if you see a train that's all 20 and 40, it's going to a port to be sent to China or Japan or Taiwan or someplace.
Yeah.
If it's got 53s on it, it's going for domestic consumption.
Right. It's, UPS sticking containers or trailers on at Chicago and shipping them somewhere domestic or whatever. So, okay.
Well, follow-up question or statement with that. You'd mentioned that most people just have the flat cars go places. My layout and 2 other layouts out here in Colorado, we actually do everything on containers and trailers and don't care about the flat car.
Okay.
So there's actual like operations for like the intermodal yard, and they'll build and break down trains. Don't care about the flat cars or the wells, just get the containers and trailers onto the train and then send it on its way. So different philosophies for sure.
Hey, that's like I said, that's why I throw the question out. Whatever, you know, if you've seen one railroad, you've seen one railroad. And
Right, but is that a unit train that you're building there?
Well, it depends. It can be either a stack train or a Z train, so it can include trailers and stacks, or 40s and 53s, and so you have to plan which wells to grab, and so there's different layouts that do different things.
Yeah.
So do the containers have car cards, or what? How do you keep track of them?
So 2 of the layouts I know of use JMRI to handle the containers and not the flat cars. One owner, he handwrites the trailers in. He has car cards, but he handwrites in, hey, grab these trailers and put them on the train. So not individual car cards, but he does some work.
Huh.
See, on the real railroads, nobody looks at the waybills on the containers except the intermodal ramps for all the train operation. Other than the fact that the customer may be UPS or JB Hunt or somebody like that, they go by everything is done by the car. The platform is where the waybill is, and everything is billed from ramp to ramp, and we don't give a hootie what's on the cars, other than if it's UPS or that determines its priority. But they only put UPS on trains that are designated for UPS.
All right. Well, like I said, that's great information. Like I figured somebody out there had to be dealing with the containers and the trailers, so it's good to hear that I'm not talking out of my butt. So, all right, let me look at the email here. Okay, well, David Walsh, I hope this was valuable for you. We went through all your questions, and as I said, if you have further questions, feel free to follow up with me or the railway operations group, and we can get you some additional information. So
one other thing that people might like that is intermodal related is not only, since there's a lot of times there's a difference in the directional flow of the containers. You have empties one way, loads the other. On the UP back in the, what was it? I guess the 90s, we had a really heavy flow where it was heavy westbound. And so every Monday, we would get together 25 locomotives that were excess that we didn't need to haul the trains out of LA, run a 25 engine power move from LA to Chicago so that it would be in Chicago by Friday morning. And then when Chicago loaded out really heavy going to LA, we had engines for it. So if you have a difference, if you're doing the bare table thing, you can also run a power move with umpteen gazillion engines, which is maybe fun.
oh yeah, I love seeing those on like the virtual rail fan, where they have that whole slew of engines together, and it's like, well, yeah, I guess they've got to balance their power at some point, you know.
Yeah.
Not every train is 4 engines going back and forth. So yeah, that's great. That's a great idea, Dave. You know, for everybody who's got 25 engines sitting around, that's a goal right there.
I was going to say, I already have too many locomotives, so
Yeah.
thanks for the idea.
All right. Okay, well, that takes care of David's questions. So, or questions. I'm happy to take any others anything else anybody would like to discuss. Feel free to throw it out.
This isn't really a question. This is Dave Hussman. But on my layout, I had an issue with at the yards where there's a switch engine and a classification yard, as trains would come in during the session, they would bring in cars for industry. But I did not want the switch engine to be spotting every single industry car that came in during the course of the session. I wanted them to spot the cars that were there at the beginning of the session. They would spot those, and then as new cars came in, those would all roll for the next shift, so to speak. So what I did was I had a little sticker, a little flag that would fit in the car card pocket that would tell which cars were spot cars. So the idea is that when a job gets a switch list, they would be given a list of which cars they should be spotting, and then all the other hold cars they wouldn't tell them to spot. So the spot card was the idea to do that. However, working with one of my friends on his car card system, I'm actually going to reverse that. I actually found that the spot card then became confusing because I had several other operations where I wanted cars to be spotted. So then I'd have to end up sticking spot cars in everything I wanted spotted as opposed to just for that industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to have all the cars that come in during the session will have a hold sticker that will just tell them to go to the yard and hold. And then as I want them spotted, I'll just remove the hold card so that everything that's spotted will just have a normal waybill, and the stuff that I want to hold, I will just specify hold. So I'm kind of flipping the direction of which way I tell the yard crews to do stuff. And it'll probably say something like hold for spotting instructions, or hold for COD, or something like that. You're muted, Eric.
Oh, I've been on a few railroads where I don't, it's been a while, where they were trying to do, like there were industry flats along like the back of the yard, and people were switching at the same time. And it was just a mess trying to get, somebody in there trying to switch while the yard masters and the switchers are trying to do work. It's just like, this seems like a terrible idea, but obviously it's prototypical, right? There's a yard and there's industries, but I'm talking like not like a small, just a couple track yard, but like a big classification type yard. And it was just like, this just seems like a bad idea, just in terms of person flow, but I'm sure everybody has different ideas than I do, so. Let's see. Mike's got a question. I have a question. How many people have crews make up multi-unit diesel sets versus just having sets the owner has defined and don't make up during the session? Mike, let me make sure I'm understanding. Are you saying you've got a bunch of essentially unconsisted engines, and the crew has to grab 1, 2, 3 of these, consist them together, and
Right.
then when they get back, break them back up?
Yeah, like like a train requires 3 diesels going out, and you have to build 3 versus 2, versus you just grab a set that has predefined.
Right. I personally haven't seen that, simply because a lot of times the engines are speed matched to each other, but I'll throw it out to the group. Is anybody doing like live, I don't know what you even call it, live consisting of power?
Hostling.
Well, hostling, yeah, sorry.
Well, to begin with, all your fleet would have to be speed matched identical.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a practical side of it, is exactly what Larry said, is you'd have a lot of fighting of engines, but
My experience, and I use an NCE system, and a lot of the people around here are familiar with it, but not too many people are familiar with consisting. So there's only one or two occasionally operators that are bold enough to consider making a multiple unit consist on their own without me doing it personally for them. So the hostling, it's like one of these fantasy jobs I have, that we would have somebody that could just devote themselves to changing up motive power. But in practice, with the pressure of an operating session, we just look for, a set of 3 locomotives and use that if we can find it. If we can't and I have time, we can put it together on the fly. But I think it's one of these things, and there are many topics like this in operations where crew experience is a real limiting factor. I mean, because the layout owner has got so much more training on how to run their own layout than most of the crew does, in at least in my case.
I totally agree with that. The reason I also asked this question is the TCS throttles. Consisting is, they have an in-throttle consisting option now, and it's much, much easier. And so I was at someone's layout, and I threw 3 sets of consist together, and all of a sudden we have a 10 engine light move happening, and it all just matched. And it was like, wow. So there's some new technologies, but like you said, if you don't know how to do it, like in the throttle or in the NCE or Digitrax, it's a bit of work, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say the JMRI engine driver, at least on Android, you can consist on the fly. You can just add engines and it will do that. Now they won't persist past the end. As soon as you turn your throttle off, it's gone, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah,
Right.
TCS has the same option, right? So
yeah. I think TCS that's a proto throttle, right?
well, no, the
I can-
UWTs, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
The
Too
option,
many
But
technologies.
I was just gonna also add to what I said, that I did speed match my entire fleet. So that also is definitely a prerequisite.
Yeah. You got to have one as the gold
Yeah.
standard.
Right.
there are other options besides doing it in a yard. For example, if you have an elevator out online, you could put a set of power on a through freight leaving the yard to carry it out to the elevator, and they would drop off a set of power at the elevator to run a grain train later. If you've got remote different yards along or locals scattered out across your layout, you can swap out power for inspections and fueling, and where you would add and subtract an engine. You could, just like you have bad order cars set out, engines have a tendency to crap out at the most inopportune times. So you can would have to maybe set out one unit, and then if you were just wanted the added degree of difficulty, as then you have another train that has a spare engine that would set out and hand off the like you have a loaded coal train, it has one of its engines die. You have an empty coal train give the loaded coal train one of its engines, and things like that. So there's all sorts of opportunities if you're going to start reconsisting engines. There's all sorts of opportunities to do it, besides just doing it in the roundhouse at the yard.
And that's exactly what I was thinking of, right? If there's an industry that has a switch engine, it's got to go in for maintenance, right? So a crew could pick it up, take it, and then bring a different one back. Yeah, or even DPUs, right? So I know I think it's UP or BNSF allows DP or requires DPUs on loaded trains, but doesn't require them on empty trains. So you could hit the mine, and then the DPU could actually join the front consist type thing. So yeah, a lot more flexibility, again, provided directions to the operators and everything speed match. But some interesting things though that I've thought about.
I was going to say, one of the things there's a couple of things that we don't really have anymore in the world of DCC is the fact that I remember when I got my first train, or let's say first Athearn diesel, and I'm like, well, you can get a dummy, put it behind it. oh, wow, that looks cool. Now I got two engines together. Back on DC, you couldn't, you know, whereas now it's like every engine's got a chip in it. And one, we don't have the ability to put the train into idle and just have it roll, right? That would be very cool. But, you know, having to, I think it'd be something where if you trusted your crews to add the engine into the consist or do it with, you know, either your TCS throttle or JMRI or whatever, I think, yeah, there's certainly some operational possibilities, but I think you got to be real careful just in terms of the mechanics of the model train is a lot, surprisingly, a lot harder than the real ones, just because, well, the real ones, you can just put them in idle and just drag them along. So,
Yeah,
To that note, a friend of mine has a steam engine that is one of the high-end brass ones, and it has a gearbox that you can take the steam engine and roll it down the tracks, and it'll
really?
roll.
Oh, that's cool.
It's if you're worm, I think you need something like it's a double helix, you know, double cut, double threaded worm gear, not worm gear, but worm. It will let you, you know, roll the engine. So it would be possible to have a drivetrain on a diesel engine that would allow it to freewheel.
yeah.
The
Basically,
problem
put it in
is that
neutral.
if you stop it on a grade, I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
You know, I'm taking away from both what Mike and Eric just said that this field, this subject is evolving right in front of us, right? And one of the things you could do is you could have a train instruction for somebody to do some of the engine moves that Dave was just talking about. And it would be, you know, somebody who wanted something to do and you didn't have a train for them, you say, here, well, let's change out some engines and that order this engine. And it could just be a work order, which would be a cool addition to an operating session, especially for the operator that had enough skills to do some of the consisting.
Well, and plus, Burr, what you just said, if all of your engines are speed matched to each, you know, to a standard, then it makes it much, much easier. And then you just leave I mean, even on Digitrax, it's not terribly complicated, right? You dial up the two engines, pick one, hit the MU button, and it connects. I mean, it's just if you're not used to it, it takes you a little bit of time. But yeah, I think that's, you know, that definitely has some possibilities.
Yeah, and with more people getting the TCS throttles and stuff, I mean, I definitely could see this evolving.
Well, and the thing is, I know I have my own feelings about Rail Pro, but it does like automatic speed matching. You know, it's a non-DC, it's not technically DCC. I don't want to get into the religious debate about it, but a buddy of mine has them. He's like, well, I don't have to speed match, it does it for me. Okay, well, if it can do it, maybe DCC will eventually be able to do it too. You know, they'll figure out how to balance the output, or I don't even know what's involved. I'm not an electrician, but let's see. Fred's asking, I'm wondering if people set up for manned helpers for a grade on the layout, but not over the whole layout. Absolutely, Fred. I've done it on at least 2 or 3 layouts. I did it at John Parker's, done it at the Pokey, Mike Richdorf, where you're basically pushing you got a steam helper, you push it up part of the way, and then the helper goes back to where it lives. So absolutely, I'm sure other people have examples as well.
Steve Rohde's layout in Omaha has that. Matter of fact, he has one train that you cut in 2 Yellowstones, one 2/3 the way back and one on the rear, and has 2 manned helpers.
Wow.
Plus the regular crew going up the grade. And then talk about a fun job for the yard master getting that one set up, because he has to cut it in to the train. And then there's been Jeff Otto has a manned helper operation too.
Yep. Yeah, and you want to talk about having to be very careful with those. I mean, pushing a helper up like a curve, I mean, that's how you end up with cars on the ground if you're not very careful. I know Richdorf had set it up where the front coupler of the pusher, the helper engine, didn't have a knuckle on it. So
Yeah, it
that
doesn't couple.
prevented it. Yeah, that prevented it from coupling and then, ripping the train apart or stringlining it or whatever. But
Yeah, Steve Brody does that also.
Hey, Dave, didn't Rhodey use live co-loads on his old layout when he
He
did that?
might have. I don't think he's doing live loads now.
Mike Richdorf did. He had live loads. He had 2 loaders, and then they would dump out into I don't think he had an unloader, but you would just kind of dump it into a bin, and then he'd reload the loader later.
My loads are well embalmed.
We use live loads on the Castle Rock and Pacific all the time.
Now, do you have a loader and an unloader?
My loader is a scoop out of the bin, and my unloader is dumping the car back into the bin.
Okay. There's a guy on what is he? He's on YouTube. He's like NS Modeler 24, I believe is his name. He's got a live. He built a live loader for HO. It's pretty impressive to see.
We threaten our operators that if they dump the coal train, we will put a monument at that location with their name on it.
Oh, here, hold on. Let me put this up in the background while we're talking here.
On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the dispatch.
I don't know if you guys can see that or not. Well, not
See
yet.
it? Yes.
Yeah, pretty amazing live load and unload operating on his layout.
Yeah. Yeah, let's speed this up a little bit.
This is too cool. I knew there was a reason I joined this meeting.
I'll throw the thing into the chat window with the link so you can watch it.
I think the unload is even more impressive, that it like moves and he has it all programmed. It like moves the car, like clamps the car, rotates the car.
Yeah.
Rotates it. It's all programmed and timed and everything. I'm like, wow.
This is crazy.
This is HO too. I mean, this is not, this is small stuff. But yeah, let me see if I can find the unloader real quick. Let's see. What's the operational flood loader? I don't know if he's got the.
It's out there. I've seen it before.
I'm going to quit the hobby. I'm going to quit the hobby tonight. That's too much.
The funniest
There
thing
we
is
go. Here we go.
here's the coal. Yeah, this is cool. Yeah, he just built, did 3 Utah belt engines, and he's touring the country. So he's been to a couple people's. Yeah. But yeah, it clamps it, it rotates it, it rotates.
I mean,
the
that's the Walthers unloader, I think.
Yeah, and it rolls forward. It pops it.
That's
Yeah.
really excellent.
Oh, here we go. Now you can see it from the back there. Oops. Got about half the car in that one. Ooh, oh, ouch. That's going to be expensive.
I've seen that happen.
In real life?
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, ooh, that's your fun of live loads right there. That stuff kind of goes everywhere, but it's still, I mean, it's impressive. I mean,
That's how you get those marks in the side of the car.
crush. All right, so I threw the link in the chat. for anybody who's feeling ambitious this week. All right. And by the way, the toilet paper, beards are cool, mullets are not. So toilet paper goes in the front, as God intended.
That's the way
All
the
right.
patent says, as long as you don't have cats.
Well, there's that. I have a dog. He pretty much, he comes in to check on us, but he doesn't deal with the toilet paper. So. All right. Any other questions? Any other discussion points for the group? We're at 8 o'clock, so. All right, well, do